Hi friends, I'm joined by Nicole Sharpe. She's an author of The End of November, and she is a domestic violence advocate and a survivor.
Yep.
So, let's talk about your book.
So, The End of November, Growing Up with Domestic Violence, is my memoir about my life as a child witnessing domestic violence. This particular incident in my life, which defined my life when my father murdered my mom, it happened at the end of November. But also, the end of November to me was the beginning of the holiday season, when it's time for family to come together and to, you know, just be together like a family and love and all these great things. And it was the end of that after that incident.
In the beginning of your book, you've got a poem.
Cold night, cold floor, stiff wind, white lights, silence. My mommy's sleeping like a baby in a pool of blood. Her hair in two corners of the room, and my daddy's standing over her. He painted the walls with her generosity, with her goodness, with her joy and peace. The carpet drenched with her laughter. Time continues in slow motion. Enveloped in this superhuman suspense, my mind is spent and my whole world is bent. His calculating camouflage made him into an innocent witness to a crime so sublime that he fooled himself into thinking he could fly away, like a crow in midday, stealing young corn. But beyond him, I mourn for my siblings, who look at the child in me and call her mama. Yes, it was a cold night, cold floor, stiff wind, white lights, and silence. It was the end of November.
What kind of space were you in when you wrote it?
Well, this happened when I was 15, and I was 2 weeks before my 16th birthday, so I wrote it when I was 16. And that's just how I felt at the moment, you know, about my father and the gaping hole that he created when he killed my mom. You know, and then his audacity to think that he could file court papers and try to have custody of us while he was on bail. You know, it just was so crazy, and my whole world was turned upside down, and it was just like it was no place to grasp, you know, nothing to grasp to, because my mom was my rock, and she wasn't there now, and that's the whole reason for the depression and, you know, all these things. I just felt like I was just floating in space.
Okay, so what was it like growing up?
Looking back, I just can't believe that I got through it. You know, I didn't get through it unscathed, but I got through it, thank God. And it was like living in fear all the time, because I never knew when my father was going to blow up. He had a very volatile personality. He used to drink a lot, so he was drunk like every weekend, starting Friday. And he could harm my mother at any time, you know, and there was no warning, really.
Okay.
But just as I got a little bit older, I started to see the warning signs, and then I would try to, I would excuse myself from the room that they were in before they actually started to fight, but I would always hear.
And you described like scene after scene after scene of like abuse.
Yes.
Like hardened abuse that you would think that it was only on TV. It was like written like a diary.
Yes.
And I thought, I'm like, well, this must be like therapeutic, like cathartic. So can you talk to me about like that purging and getting it all out on the page?
Well, the events that I grew up with, I would love to forget all of them. And I was forgetting them as I got older. But they would affect me. My life, you know, everything that happened in the past affected me negatively a lot. So a friend of mine said, why don't you just write a diary online, do a blog.
Okay.
And so I created a blog called wordofthecourt.blogspot.com. And then the same friend said to me, why don't you turn it into a book? I'm like, no, I don't want people to know this. But then I started saying to myself, this would really help people who are in situations, you know, like this, to maybe get out, because you don't ever hear a child's point of view, who witnessed domestic violence. A lot of kids have witnessed it, and they just grow up silent. and you're taught to be silent. So I said, okay, so I'll do this just for that reason. And it was cathartic, and it did help a lot of people.
And so what happened to your dad after he killed your mom?
So he was out on bail for a year, and then the court case happened, and then he received, he was charged with second-degree manslaughter, and he received only 7.25 years in jail. So
that seems odd to me, simply because small-time drug dealers get larger sentences than that, and it seems like, well, second-degree murder. Isn't there? This seems like a lesser charge for someone who shot and killed someone.
Well, the DA who was dealing with the case, actually told me point blank, because they're very blunt, told me that wives are possessions of men, and that's the way that the law sees it. And this was in 1991, and it has changed a bit since then. Back then, if police came to a domestic violence incident in a home, they would just, well, for example, in my situation, they would just tell my parents, just work it out and leave. But now, when they come, they have to arrest the assailant.
Okay.
Yeah, no matter what the victim is saying.
So when the DA told you, like, well, wives are possessions of their husband, like, what was going through your mind?
What do you mean? My mom was a human being. But they were just saying that in a way just to let me know that that's the way the law is. And I was saying to myself as a child, well, the law has to change. You know, and thankfully it has changed a bit, but there's still a lot of changes to be done. Usually, unfortunately, women see themselves as possessions of men.
What? What are you talking about? Because I don't see myself as
that. And I don't see myself as one either. But this culture that we're in, and like the DA said, it breeds that. I mean, a long time ago, a woman was a possession, definitely, like a cow. You know, that was a long time ago. But some things have changed, but that same type of mindset is still there for some reason, where women are not seen as equal as men. And that's my reasoning for why he received such a low charge. Okay.
So that was in 1991. Where's your father today?
So he passed away 3 years ago. Yeah. He had cancer and a host of other health problems. But every 2 years, my family and I would go to the parole board and make sure that he stayed, because he had that option after 7.25 years. Good behavior in prison. We had that option of going up to the parole board, and we would always make sure he stayed. So they exhausted all of that, so he had to get out at his earliest release date, which is a few years ago. And then 3 years after that is when he passed away.
Okay, so when your dad was released, what was your relationship like? Because it would seem to me like this is the man you loved, and he's your father, but also he's the man who hurt you the most and killed your mother. Yeah. So how did it make you feel, when he was released?
It was such a dilemma, because like you said, I loved my father, and I was very close to my father, but I didn't love what he did to my mom. And then all the other stuff that culminated being an orphan is not a good thing. And when he came out, at first, I was very fearful, and I was covered in fear. And it just brought back all those memories as if I was there that night again when he shot my mom. And so I was afraid to go outside, you know, and then I just said to myself, I have to stop this. Every man that I saw looked like my father. But then the parole officer, I got in contact with the parole officer after a while, because I heard that he was dying. And he wasn't necessarily dying back then, but he was very sick. So I said, okay, he can't do anything to me. But I did put in a stipulation for the parole officer to make sure he doesn't come into the borough of Brooklyn. So he couldn't. But then when he really started getting sick, I decided to go see him again.
What was that like?
It was bad and good, because we were able to meet our father again. Very weird, seeing him like a little feeble man. You know, he had 2 heart attacks in prison, and he had a bout of cancer in prison that went into remission. And it just didn't look like him. But at the same time, he was apologizing for what he did. But then he wanted everything to go back to normal or abnormal. He wanted us to be with him for Christmas, to be with him for Thanksgiving. And we were like, hello. You know, this is, I think it was 18 years later. This is 18 years later. You know, it's not going to happen like that. But, you know, slowly, we did start spending some time with him. Not a lot, but it was enough just to see this person in the flesh again, who's my father. Yeah. And then he ended up, you know, going to church and giving his life to the Lord. And it just, it made a difference. But every single time I would see him, I would be so, like, livid that, why am I sitting here talking to you? You know, I hate you. I love you. I hate myself for loving you.
So what was going through your mind when he died, when you got the news that he died?
It was very hurtful. It was very hurtful. I spoke at his funeral. My sister and I paid for his funeral. And it was just like, okay. I don't mean it in a way like we didn't care. We cared very much so, but it was like, what a waste. What a waste.
Well, what do you mean?
The way he lived his life. The way he lived his life, hurting my mother. This one woman who loved him. I know that he came from a relationship with his mom. His mom gave him away to her brother because she didn't want to take care of him. So that motherly love wasn't there. He didn't know his father. So he grew up dysfunctional. It doesn't mean that everyone in a situation like that is going to grow up dysfunctional, but he did. And he decided to hurt people, especially those who he loved the most. And in turn, he just ended up hurting himself. My mother was easy to love. So, why didn't my father love her? It's simple. He didn't love himself. If your candle is extinguished, how can you light someone else's? In the same vein, if you don't possess a love for self, how can you give love to others?
You describe your mom as beautiful and loving and smart. And yet she was not loved by your father. She was abused by your father. I don't know if he loved him or not, but
I think my father loved her in his dysfunctional way.
So what is battered women syndrome? Because we hear it all the time and it's thrown out constantly, but what is it?
It's when a woman doesn't feel as though she can live on her own without this person who's abusing her. They don't feel like, after being brainwashed for so long, it's hard to make that transition where you separate yourself from the abuser. The abuser becomes your best friend, and they make it sound as though they care about you and they're just doing this for you. It has a lot to do with low self-esteem and the abuser being very equipped to bring down your self-esteem even further. They just seem to be like trained to do that. They know the right things to say, the right things to do, the right situations to create to make you feel as though you need them. So all that encompasses battered women syndrome. So essentially it's a syndrome where you can't get away psychologically, or you feel like you can't leave.
So you identify with your abuser.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And
it's like coral growing on a sunken ship.
Yeah. How's that?
Yeah. Like you just like barnacles, just stuck there. You know, for life.
That's an interesting analogy.
I know, it just came up in my head. But you don't need that ship to survive. It's dead and sunken.
Here are some statistics that I pulled up from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. It was something like one in 4 women are victims of domestic abuse. 1.3 million women a year are abused. So it's like, with these numbers, they're so staggering. It's like, well, you're either the victim of abuse, you know someone who's being abused, or you're about to be abused. Right. And so it's like, it's so scary. And so when like I hear a woman like, okay, well, that could never happen to me, it's kind of like, okay, perhaps, but the numbers are there to back up, like, this happens to a lot of people. What does one look for signs of abuse?
Well, one thing that for myself, I think is a red flag is when someone says, "You're too good for me." Okay. If they actually mouth those words, they're probably right. because they know themselves better than you do.
Okay.
So I usually run away when I hear that.
Okay.
People who want to have control over how you dress, right?
Like, what do you mean?
Like, if they say, if they're ready to cover you up,
okay,
you know, and have a big say in what you wear, even buy your clothes for you. We might not look at that as anything bad. Oh, great, he's buying me clothes, but did you have a say in what he bought? No, he wants you to be his Barbie. He wants you to dress a certain way that's good for him.
Okay.
Right, that's a red flag. Also, someone who may want to buy your phone and have you on their line so that they can have access to your phone records.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag.
Okay.
And a girl might say, oh, he gave me a phone.
Yeah,
it
could be like, oh, he's sweeping me off my feet. He's taking care of me.
Right.
Look at everything he's done for me. He's buying me meals. He's buying me clothes. He's buying me like phones, shoes, everything, anything that I can possibly ask for or want. He's getting for me. So how do you know if it's abuse or if it's control or if it's you just really wants to get it for you?
If it's not just one isolated thing, if there's other things, like it could be a combination of all those things.
Okay.
And also too, they will want to control who you are friends with. Okay. They might have a problem with a couple of your friends and then forbid you from seeing a friend, even from forbidding you from seeing certain relatives as well. They try to isolate you from your support group.
Okay.
Definite red flag.
Okay. Have you experienced this yourself? Were you ever in one of those relationships? Because another thing I've read in my research is that children of domestic violence or children who witness it growing up are more likely to fall into the generational cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
Okay. So is this personal red flags that you've seen in your own relationships?
I have seen the red flag of buying of the clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the phone. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've experienced those.
So it's like Nicole has lived it, she's seen it. Okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting too because as I got older, I read those statistics as well. And I said, this is not going to happen to me.
Right.
I'm not going to be my mommy. And then here I was just easing into it. And then you know why? Because it was familiar. And we are creatures of habit, and we like what is familiar. But if your familiar is dysfunction, you have to retrain yourself. And I think that's why it's important for someone leaving an abusive relationship, no matter how little you think it has affected you, you should seek professional help. I'm an advocate for professional help.
Okay.
Seeing a counselor, a psychologist, anyone who can help you, that you can talk to and give you good advice.
How does someone looking in from the outside, like a family member, what can they do other than ignore it and pretend it's normal?
Just being a support and being open and willing to help them when they're ready to make that decision to leave is very important. You can't force anyone to leave, but you can show them different ways that they can leave and help that they can find, and then just keep encouraging them and don't ever put them down.
I've been in the position in which I've seen like I've known of domestic violence or a friend who's being abused, and it's kind of like, well, I feel helpless. It's like, well, I want to help, and he's doing unkind things to you, but still you stay. But what am I supposed to do? I can't hang around.
Yeah.
And so that kind of
frustration.
It kind of spits in the face of well, show support by being there and giving encouragement. But it's it's hard to watch. It is
very, very frustrating. And I knew it was frustrating for my aunts and uncles, my mom's brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
I mean, they were it was beyond belief. They were just so frustrated they would scream, but don't do that. But always be open to that person, and hopefully eventually they will make that decision to leave. And that's what makes domestic violence such a difficult thing to deal with, because it is a disease, but it's not a disease that you can just give someone medicine and take them to the hospital and say, okay, get better. It's psychological, it's very deep. And they need to just know that the medicine would be giving them options and always reminding them they have options and always letting them know you love them and letting them know that you're there for them for when they make that decision. But don't ever isolate them, because that's what the perpetrator wants to happen. They want them to be isolated. The perpetrator also tells them lies about their friends and family too. They don't like you, they can't stand you. My father used to tell that to my mom a lot. You know, they're just using you, and sometimes the victim believes these things. But you have to keep reinforcing the love that you have for them, knowing that that's what's happening on the other side. There's a brainwashing happening on the other side. But on this side, the good side that you want that person to come to, you got to keep letting them know you love them and just being there for them.
Let's talk about your survival story. Like, how are you now?
The fact that I survived what happened, I saw the need to use my life to help others, to help other women or men who are in abusive relationships to leave. And so I started some advocacy work, and this was in 2008. And it's like everything happened at the same time. I started the blog then. I started the advocacy there first by getting educational literature from the mayor's office to combat domestic violence. And they give you free literature, which is very cool. You just call them or you order online. Then I would just ask my boss if I can just give out stuff during my lunch period. And so I would get a table and some chairs and just give out information for free. And then it just caught on where people just kept on like wanting to know more information, know more. I just wanted to combat a lot of misconceptions too about victims and survivors.
Your mom was an example for you, and you were an example for your girls.
Yeah, they know the advocacy work that I do. And I actually do have them help sometimes when there's events and they put together little satchels of gifts, and such. And they know about my book. And my older daughter, she took the book to school actually one day, and all of her friends read it. And they had like a little book club, and I thought it was very cool. And it's educating the kids because they need to be educated. She was in junior high. I think they need to be educated from then about domestic violence.
You talk about the power of fear. Well, what did it mean to you?
Well, I grew up with fear, not knowing when my father would blow up. My mom telling me, don't ever tell anyone what happens in the house, like when I go to school. And it's just like a part of my life that I hate. I hate being fearful. And so now, I've grown to a point, thank God, that I don't fear people. I can speak to whoever I want to speak to, express myself without being fearful. I had to learn how to speak up louder. I had to change my stance, everything. Because everything about me just seemed like I was just a ball of fear. The way I would sit down and slouch and now it's like, why am I living in fear? And this is why I call domestic violence homegrown terrorism. We don't know what happens behind closed doors of these picturesque looking houses and families. But there's terrorism going on, and that's what domestic violence is. When you live in terror, walking on eggshells, and it's not fun. And that's how I lived. And I don't want to ever go back to that again. Yeah. And I'll tell you that I was married, and that was the abusive relationship. And I left while I was pregnant. I left when I was pregnant. And that's people were saying to me, why are you leaving? You're pregnant. Yeah, I'm leaving to save myself and my child, my unborn child, and my other daughter.
Okay.
And it's interesting, it's amazing how family members knew what happened to my mom, but they were still encouraging me to stay. Very interesting. But I knew what was better to do for myself and my kids.
Yeah. It seems like you overrode the social pressure to stay married with your husband. Yeah. Because there is that pressure, like, well, you're there, stay and work it out. But there's some things you just can't work out.
Yeah. And some people are like, you're going to be a single mother. Do you know that? Yeah. And I've come to enjoy challenges, especially when people are against me, and I know that I'm doing the right thing. It doesn't faze me. I know I'm doing the right thing, and life was harder, but it got better. With God's grace, it got better. So when you do leave a situation where the person is helping to support you and your children, it's going to get better. The transition phase is always, a a little difficult. It always is difficult. I mean, to get up and leave your home and go to a shelter, that's difficult, but your life is worth it, and the lives of your children are worth it.
Is that what you did? Did you have to go to a shelter?
No, I didn't have to go to a shelter, but I just got it one day and just got another apartment without him knowing and just left.
Okay. Okay. I sense that, I imagine that that's not an option for everyone.
Right. Like if I had to go into shelter, I would go into a shelter.
Okay.
I know it's not the most glamorous place to be, but it's only temporary.
Okay.
It's temporary.
So how else did you prepare to make that transition?
It's like I did exactly what my mom did. I had my uncle help me, the same uncle that helped my mom move those 2 times. He helped me to move just in like lickety-split one day while my husband was at work.
Okay.
You know, but I didn't go back. I did not go back. Why should I walk down the street, watching my back and my front, scared of a mere man, robbing my life of happiness and joy? Fear is debilitating, and I'm tired of people trying to weaken me to my knees. I am confident, I am fearless, and more importantly, I am alive. Therefore, I will use my example to help others to get out of their abusive relationships. I hope that victims will realize that life is too short to waste living in fear. Life can be cut even shorter if we decide to stay with an abuser. If you're in a relationship where you feel as though you're being controlled, there doesn't have to be any hitting involved or any shoving or pushing, anything physical. But abuse comes in many different forms. Someone trying to isolate you, someone trying to control your spending habits, you know, someone trying to control the way that you dress, any kind of control. Please leave, because a lot of people don't realize that these things just build up and just get worse with time. And your life is more important than that. So don't be afraid, and there's a lot more programs that are out there today to help people who are victims of domestic violence.
Thank you. Let's end the cycle of abuse. If you or someone you know are in an abusive relationship, call a domestic violence hotline.